Hello, I'm Elizabeth Glinker and you're watching Sunday Politics London. Good morning and welcome. Coming up later in the show. The Mayor's budget went before the London Assembly this week. Is there enough money to increase police numbers and make Londoners feel safe? And with claims the Conservative Party is moving to the right, is there a growing disconnect between voters in London and the Tory High Command? And joining me for the duration today is Rushanara Ali, the Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, and Stephen Hammond, the Conservative MP for Wimbledon, and he is of course also a Health Minister. Welcome to both of you today.
Good morning.
Now we are going to start today by putting you both under the spotlight and asking what is the event, what has happened this week that you really want to draw attention to? Stephen, if I start with you.
Well, everybody expects politicians to start with the B word, so I'm going to start with the B word, bins. I had a street
different B word.
Yeah, I had a street stall yesterday, and a lady came up to me and said, "Mr. Hammond, my bin still hasn't been delivered." Our local council were going to introduce a new recycling scheme. 6 months afterwards, some people still haven't got their bins. And they've introduced a new contract to clean the streets, and it's not working. So my moment of the week, and this will be particularly clear for residents in Wimbledon and across Merton, is we have mucky Merton. It's got to stop, and our council have got to get on top of it.
Right, OK, that's quite a phrase, mucky Merton. Is that your own? Did you come up with that?
Well, I claim the author of that one.
OK, all right. And what do your residents think about that? Are they all right with it, having their area dubbed mucky?
Well, no, I think because they're really cross that the local council has not done what they're supposed to do. If you were going to introduce a recycling scheme in October and someone is coming up to me in a street stall at the end of January and they still haven't got the recycling bin so they can recycle, that's what I would call inept, and that's what my local residents say.
Right, although some would say this is a very Conservative policy, isn't it? Outsourcing to a private company, you know, letting the market be more efficient at delivering these services.
So next door you have Wandsworth Council who do it, who keep their streets clean, who have a great recycling scheme. Someone might say it's an inability to manage the contract, and I would certainly be saying that.
Some might say. Rushanara, what is your spotlight issue of the week?
My spotlight issue of the week is a Westminster Hall debate on further education funding. And despite the fact that the Prime Minister was yet again making a statement about Brexit, this debate in Westminster Hall had a very large turnout. MPs are very concerned across different parties, but obviously many on my side in the Labour Party about the funding cuts in further education colleges. You have a higher proportion of working class students attending those colleges, and they've faced some £3.3 billion worth of cuts since 2010.
And has this had a particular impact in your area?
Yes, so my local college, the Tower Hamlets College, which I attended, has had to merge with another college. It's now called New City College, because of the funding shortage, teachers having to leave, 24,000 less teachers in the FE sector across the country, and fewer teaching hours. So the call on the government ahead of whenever the spending review comes is to shore up those colleges, because if we want to deal with the skills shortage, if we want to make sure young people and mature students who also attend those colleges have the right education and support and opportunities, and if this government is serious about creating a fairer society, then they need to invest in further education colleges.
Right, OK. Well, nice to sort of draw attention to a couple of issues that perhaps we wouldn't normally talk about. But of course, it is Sunday Politics London. We are going to have to mention the B word. Just a little bit about what you're expecting on Tuesday, Rushanara.
Well, we have a number of amendments down by backbench colleagues, one by Yvette Cooper, which is to seek an extension to Article 50. I'm certain that our front bench will support it. There are a number of other amendments in that sort of vein, one by Rachel Reeves, one by Jack Droney.
Do you have a preference for what you would like to Is there an amendment that you favour?
I'm supporting those amendments, and I think the one that's particularly key is the Yvette Cooper amendment, which is a cross-party backbench-led amendment which is legally binding. So that I very much hope some Tory MPs
It'll be interesting
will support
to see,
it.
Well, indeed, Stephen. So, will you support it? What are your kind of feelings at the moment?
Well, Elizabeth, you know the old phrase, a week's a long time in politics. Well, at the moment when you're discussing Brexit, a day is a long time in politics.
It certainly is.
So there's a whole range of amendments down, some of which I think would potentially breach international treaty obligations, so I'm not sure they're going to get things that will get through. There is the Cooper-Bowles amendment, which is designed to bring the government back. What I'm rather hoping is that when we get the statement on Tuesday, the Prime Minister will give some definition to when she expects to hold the meaningful vote.
Right, and as a Remainer, self-confessed Remainer yourself.
I'm proud of it. And
proud, OK, fair enough, that's fair enough. Do you have a feeling about any of the amendments? Are there any that sort of are in tune with what you would like to see, a direction of travel?
Well, I think that a number of my colleagues, and indeed I have said publicly since New Year, that we think that no deal would be a disastrous way for the country and the country's economy. And you see that for the livelihoods. If you look at the practical implications of no deal, you see the impact it would have on the livelihoods of my constituents, Londoners, and the country. And that's why a lot of us want to see a deal agreed, so we can then start talking about the future relationship.
OK, thanks to both of you. We're going to leave it there for now. Park the B word just for now. Right. This week, the London Mayor was grilled by the London Assembly on his third annual budget. He's responsible for around £18 billion of spending over the next year. It's one of the largest budgets of a directly elected official in the whole of Europe. Bhavani Vadi looks at how the budget will impact on policing here in the capital.
It always seems to come down to money, like our children's lives don't mean anything. We can't do this because we don't have a budget. We don't have that because we don't have money available.
Yemi Hughes speaking after the murder of her 19-year-old son on the BBC debate London's Knife Wars this week. And yet again, pressures on policing budgets were raised when the Mayor was questioned about his annual budget by the London Assembly.
This budget outlines the action we're taking to keep Londoners safe in the face of the government's massive cuts to the Met Police. Around 70% of the Met's funding is controlled by the government, who've repeatedly refused to reverse the cuts they've made since 2010. We simply don't have the power to fully compensate all these cuts from City Hall.
The Mayor plans to raise his share of council tax for a third year in a row, unlike his predecessor, who either cut or froze it. This means an additional £95 million from the Mayor to help fight crime. But this budget roughly maintains police officers at the current levels.
The public always wants to see bobbies on the beat. There is a risk to the Mayor that he will increase the council tax precept. There will be more money, but people won't notice much change on the streets. So that is always a problem for a Mayor, that people want to see officers in uniform, and I don't think this increase is going to make that much difference to that.
But the Conservative group on the London Assembly say Sadiq Khan could be doing more. They claim to have costed £83 million of savings, which could fund nearly 1,400 more officers if the Mayor cut spending in other areas.
And there are areas of discretionary spend that he has chosen to increase drastically since he's been mayor. These are things he doesn't have to do, that he could divert into other areas. So, for example, he has increased the level of staffing at City Hall by 37%. So there are more than 1/3 more people, more bureaucrats, working in City Hall than there were under the previous mayor. Now, that could all have been put into policing.
There's no doubt there's a budget constraint. There's always been budget constraints, but it's about choices. And if Londoners think safety is a choice, you have to reflect that in your budget. The Mayor continually defers to the government. I think at some point Londoners are beginning to say, why are you not taking charge of this? You have some money, do what you can.
Again, keep on smiling, keep on smiling.
A photo op while London Assembly members take a break from questioning the Mayor on his annual budget. The key priorities once again are spending levels on policing amid rising violent crime and how the black hole in Transport for London's finances will affect Londoners.
And I'm seriously concerned about the future of our transport network in London as a result of this year's budget. The Mayor is facing a time where advertising revenue's going down, he's lost his grant from government, and Crossrail, the crisis that is Crossrail and the additional money that's having to be pumped into there. But also in terms of lost fares revenue, £600 million over 3 years. It's leaving a huge hole in TfL's budget, and the Mayor has got to find a way to make that up, otherwise London is going to grind to a halt.
But the leader of the Labour group on the London Assembly defends the Mayor's plans.
I think you have to see the context this budget's been set in. This is about the 8th year of government cuts, and in policing we're seeing that very fiercely. The hand of cards he's being dealt with have been very tough and challenging for him to deliver within. I think this budget will make a difference, but it's done in a set of very difficult circumstances and against Brexit.
The Mayor is responsible for £18 billion of spending on public services such as transport, the fire service, the work of City Hall, as well as policing. But do Londoners think he's made the right decisions?
OK, and you can see the BBC London special, London's Knife Wars, What's the Solution, that featured in Bhavani's film there on the BBC iPlayer. Now, my next guest figured prominently in that debate show, actually. She is, of course, Sophie Linden, the Deputy Mayor for Policing. Sophie, thank you for joining us. Hello. It was quite heated, that debate this week, wasn't there? A lot of relatives of those impacted by knife crime, a lot of passion. That must have been quite difficult, and I would say there was a sense from those people that the Mayor still isn't doing enough on this issue of violent crime.
I mean, I meet families of victims regularly, and there were a lot of families of victims in the debate this week, and I completely understand why the passion and the emotion, because they're dealing with unbearable grief. What the Mayor has been doing, and he's using everything in his power, and he's put extra money into the Metropolitan Police, £94 million to tackle violence this year into the police budget. He's putting up the precept, making those difficult decisions. But we know, then Lendeval's right, it's the context that we're operating within, and the government has cut £850 million from the Metropolitan Police budget, and you can't get away from the fact that that has an impact, it has an effect. The Mayor's doing everything he can. The government really needs to step up and make sure that they do everything they can to put money back into the Metropolitan Police budget.
We are seeing more money going into the policing budget, but it isn't, as we heard in the film, it's not actually going to result in many more officers on the beat, is it?
Well, it will result in, the Mayor put extra money in last year, and that is going to result in an extra 1,000 officers than would have been affordable. And the money for this year will result in extra police officers. But is it getting us to where we need to be? No, it won't, because we cannot fill the black hole that the government has left by not funding the police grant to the Met. Over 70% of the Metropolitan's police budget is from the government. It really matters that they're not funding the police grant properly, all those extra responsibilities that the Metropolitan Police has, because it's a capital city.
Indeed, but we did hear in the film that the Conservative group on the GLA has come up with a costed plan which could result, they say, in a huge amount more money, 83 million for policing. I mean, is it worth looking at some of those proposals?
Well, I think those figures they've come up with are pretty nonsense figures, designed to...
Are they nonsense? I mean, well, they're costed them. They are laid out.
They're costed, but they're designed to distract attention from the real issue for the Metropolitan Police and the real issue for London, that it's losing out from this Tory government. And what they need to explain is if they cut that, they're going to be cutting services, mayoral programmes that are working to help young people not get involved in violence, tackling London's toxic air pollution and getting rough sleepers off the street. That's what the Tories are suggesting we should cut. And I, frankly, don't think that's responsible.
Stephen, is that a fair comment? When we look at this, 70% of funding for the Met comes from central government, and it's been slashed.
So if you got to the last round, the Met got an increase in the funding, and some of the funding from the national budget. This is a mayor who can't take responsibility, and Londoners are seeing that. He's prioritising, and Sophie says this isn't costed. OK, it is costed, and you may dispute the costings. Most of it is not in those projects. Things are things that are easily discretionable spend. So something like 13 million he's spending on his PR people. You know, this is PR over policing. He's got a huge amount of money in his reserves. He's shutting a police station in my constituency. He's being judicially reviewed for it but he won't take the money out of reserves to save it.
Rushanara, does Stephen have a point there that we do, you know, there is a danger that it starts to look increasingly like the mayor's go-to answer is always, it's the government's fault, it's the government's fault, it's the government's fault, and he's not taking responsibility.
How can you How can anyone argue that when the mayor has increased council tax, unlike his predecessor, who ducked the issue and is finding a way of paying for extra policing in our capital city? How can anyone argue that when national violent crime rates went up by 19%, it was reported last week? That's the national figure, which Sadiq Khan's not responsible for, the Home Secretary and the government's responsible for. The Conservative Party has become the party of crime and disorder, not the party of law and order. That's what Stephen's party needs to sort out, and that requires investment, that requires partnership, working with city mayors and council leaders, whichever political colour they come from. And that's what, with respect, hang on, Stephen, that's what the public want, that's what they need. They're sick and tired of the Conservative government blaming local mayors. Let me finish. Stop interrupting. Stop interrupting, Stephen. Let me finish my point. I didn't interrupt you. The fact is my constituents are sick and tired of violent crime, antisocial behaviour. They expect a partnership between the mayor and the government. They don't really care who and which party is in charge. They want control over crime and disorder, and this government is not getting a grip, and that's what needs to happen. Stephen.
Well, I'm afraid my constituents are sick and tired of a mayor who can't take responsibility.
I rest my case. Hold on. With respect, I rest my case.
No, he could choose. I was going to ask you to say, if he chose to take that 83 million, he could put 1,300...
Why would you want me to say something?
Well, because you have just said he is a mayor who can't do any of these things. He can do some of these things.
I didn't say that.
But he can put 83 million...
You're not listening, Stephen.
I am listening.
Just like your Prime Minister
I am
over
listening.
Brexit.
You can put 83 million back, put 1,300 police officers back on the streets. You can, and I agree he's increased the precept, you need to do that. But he needs to be doing more. And you may say the national figure, but the London figure is down to the mayor, and he has provision over the rise over burglary.
Final word from
Stephen, as you know,
hold on a second.
Stephen, as you very well know, the mayor has taken some really difficult decisions, not just to increase the precept in London, to move business rates, which were, business rates into policing, to really increase the amount of money going in. He's also taken really difficult decisions, yes, to close police stations that I know you've campaigned against, but that's about making difficult decisions, taking responsibility and making sure he can put London on the best foot it can. But he is hamstrung by the government's funding. He absolutely is. People understand that. And coming up with fictitious figures is not going to get away from the fact you have to not only invest in policing.
You're not saying these figures are fictitious,
you need to invest in policing, but you also need to invest in those things that will deal with the complex causes of violence.
He's doing neither.
Sophie Linden, thank you very much for joining us. We will have you back again soon because this is something we will return to, I am sure. Thank you very much. Now, this week, a London Conservative Party candidate announced he was leaving the party, claiming the Tories have moved so far to the right that they are now at odds with moderate, socially liberal voters in the capital. Our reporter Jessica Ure caught up with the academic Nigel Fletcher, who's also the deputy leader of the Conservative opposition group in Greenwich, and began by asking him if the Tories have a problem in London.
I think the Conservative Party does have a problem in London, precisely because the type of people that it has traditionally struggled to appeal to, younger voters, those with more liberal attitudes, ethnic minority voters, are precisely the type of people who are most prevalent in London. And in areas where the Conservatives have been strong, in the outer London suburbs, those type of voters are increasing as well. So there's an increasingly narrow band of support that the Conservatives can rely on in London, and the problem seems to be getting worse for them. Voters in London have voted overwhelmingly for Remain. And so, of course, the Conservative Party being seen as the party of Brexit is something which is harming its support. I think what's notable is that those voters who were attracted by a sort of more liberal and moderate tone from David Cameron are those who are being turned off by the increasing talk about Brexit and the sort of constant focus on it. The problem now is that the Conservative Party is appealing more and more to its traditional support and less to socially liberal moderate voters. The fact that London is so much younger and more liberal, the argument is that that's how the country is going to develop in the future. So it's important for the party to be able to appeal to those voters, not just because of its appeal in London, but because that's really what's happening across the rest of the country. And if they don't manage to get London right, there possibly could be greater problems for them in attracting voters into the future.
So joining me now is Nick Matsey, a former London Tory party candidate who has left the party, or as he might say, the party has left him. Is that how you feel, Nick?
That's exactly how I'd feel, actually. Since I started campaigning very heavily for the Conservatives in 2014 and 15 for the general election, the party felt very much one about social mobility, enabling people to bring about change. That's why David Cameron had such a great result in that election. Things have very much changed post-Brexit, the referendum, and the party now has become much more ideological, and the roots of pro-business, of pro-technology, pro-opportunity seems to have gone, and we now have people like Marc Francois saying things like calling the chief exec of Airbus a Teutonic bully. That's ideological language and probably going to cause people to lose their jobs. That's not what I would campaign for.
And is at the centre of this then really, is Brexit a big issue? Because of course that is something that perhaps sets London apart from the rest of the country, isn't it?
Brexit is absolutely a big issue, and if anything it was the catalyst for change. It's one of those things that allowed people to actually come out a bit more about their honest politics, what I think perhaps sometimes what they really felt. And they were enabled by some quite ugly campaigns that we saw, some ugly posters, a lot of mistruths, things as I call lies and fraud, and I think there is a huge amount of evidence for lies and fraud by the Leave campaign. And it enabled people to say and do things that they wouldn't otherwise normally do. And those people that were before in the franchises of UKIP or the BNP have now come, as Matthew Parris said in the Times,
into the Conservative Party?
Yes, because they have nowhere else to
I mean,
turn.
that's a bold claim. Where do you go now? As a Conservative with a small c, but sort of self-confessed social liberal, where do you go now?
At the moment, my intent is to run as an independent, and I hope there will be an army of independents that will join me across the nation and to stand up for the principles which they believe in, because at the moment there isn't really a party there. What I've discovered is also there's a huge number of Labour voters who feel the same, and the message coming through very strongly from people is that they've stayed in the Conservatives because they think Corbyn is the worst of the possible option, and there are people who stayed in Labour because they think the Conservatives are the worst possible option, but neither of them particularly that keen about the leadership or the membership in which they are now with.
So, Stephen, is this a worry to you that you're losing young activists like Nick, progressives, appealing to the electorate in London? You're losing these people. They just don't feel at home in a Conservative Party anymore.
No, it is a worry. Of course it's a worry. I would hope that Nick will be able to say next year that he'll be wanting to stand as a Conservative in 2021 or 22, whenever the general election is. And my party needs to remember that you win elections from the centre and the common ground, being in touch with people's aspirations, being in touch with their concerns. And becoming too ideological, particularly about one thing that actually divides us.
Would you say the leadership of your party is too ideological at the moment on Brexit?
No, I wouldn't say it's the leadership at all. I would say there are elements in my party, which Nick has identified, which are causing us to have an image which I think we need to consider very carefully. As I say, we know that we've won elections because we came and got on the common ground with other people, with the people's and the voters' aspirations, not only in London but across the country.
And Rushanara, I mean, why aren't you capitalising on this and absolutely smashing the Conservatives?
I tried recruiting Nick to the
to
the Labour Party earlier on before we joined the studio. But I think that both parties do. Nick's right that both parties have their challenges in trying to reach out to those who feel that we're not speaking for them, and we have our own issues. So this is a bigger political problem for the country and for political parties about how we provide a prospectus that speak to people who feel alienated from politics for quite different reasons than in the past. The Conservatives have a toxicity issue about, in fact, race and immigration, as well as being inward-looking. Theresa May started the mantra many years ago by calling her party the nasty party. It's beginning to resurface again because of Brexit debates. We have our own issues, which I recognise that we are working to address.
OK, Rushanara, thank you very much. Nick, we wish you well and we hope you find a home.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us. Now, last week we looked at the post-Grenfell Tower issue of cladding and a block of privately owned flats in Bromley, where the residents were being asked to pay £70,000 for the cost of removing dangerous material. The story speaks to the confusion over who is responsible for decladding these buildings: the owners, the government, the councils, or the residents.
The owner of that particular block in Bromley is a multi-million-pound property company. These are not people on the edge. When you buy your flat from your freeholder on your 99-year lease, you do expect that your freeholder will ensure that you have a safe place to live. So I'm sure there may be in some cases a contribution from government, but in this one it's quite clear to me that the freeholders should be paying up.
Well, then on Wednesday this week, the Labour MP for Croydon Central, Sarah Jones, raised the issue of cladding at Prime Minister's questions.
Today, 19 months on, the vast majority, 85% of the hundreds of blocks draped in exactly the same highly flammable cladding are still covered.
Interim measures are in place when necessary on all of the 171 high-rise private residential buildings with the unsafe ACM cladding, but permanent remediation is rightly the focus, and we've repeatedly called on private building owners not to pass costs on to leaseholders. As a result of our interventions, 212 owners have either started, completed or have commitments in place to remediate. There are 56 owners that are refusing to remediate. We're maintaining pressure on this, but we rule nothing out.
OK, Rushanara, I know this is something that you have been involved in your own constituency, isn't it?
Yes, we have 41 privately owned blocks and a number of social housing blocks. Now, there is a response from the government on the social housing side, but the funding isn't adequate. On the private blocks, there is a massive issue in making sure that private owners, the freeholders, pay for the costs, because many of them are trying to pass the costs.
But many
others
yeah.
are complying, but there are significant numbers that are not.
Have any of those privately owned blocks in your constituency actually had any remediation work done as yet?
Well, there've been the local authorities obviously chasing where that's needed. I've had constituents come to see me about the fact that they're getting bills passed on to them. So they're caught in the middle, and that's why the national government does need to step in to set the agenda, legislate, apply sanctions where necessary.
Yeah.
Not all of them will require it if they're cooperating, but what we're concerned about are the blocks nearly 2 years on from Grenfell where not much has happened. And in the meantime, those blocks require 24/7 security, fire wardens, and that is a real worry for residents.
Stephen, this is terrible, isn't it, really? People living in buildings still wrapped in this cladding. Is the government doing enough?
Well, as Rushanara rightly said, the government and on the social housing, whether it be council or housing association action, money has been put in, something like 400 million to make sure that's working. Where Rushanara is rightly identifying is that there are some, not a huge number, but a significant number, as the Prime Minister said, 56, we've identified out of over 400 tower blocks that have this cladding, which are in privately owned, in private ownership, where we need to do more. And it is a mixture, as the Prime Minister has said, and my friend, the Housing Minister, Clip Morthouse, I know, is working to put pressure on these people, working with local councils to put pressure on people.
And do you think it may need legislation?
Well, I think what the point he has said is there is legislation there, potentially, that could be used and applicable. And he's working with councils and reminding landlords of their obligations, what we want to do. And as the Prime Minister rightly said, the freeholder should not be passing on the costs to leaseholders. But I think the key thing is that whatever, there have been costs, and Rushanara was right to point out some of the issues are there. But the remediation measures that were put in place straight after Grenfell means that people were safe in their house last night.
Thank you very much. OK, we're going to have to leave it there. This is something we are going to return to. Thank you to Rushanara and to Stephen, my guest this week. We'll see you next week at the same time.